It's the early morning of February 21st, 2006. We're near Malibu, and heading west on the Pacific Coast Highway. That's this road right here, in all of its Google Earth glory. In person, though? Well, person's a beautiful drive along the sun-washed coast. I mean, there is a reason why people come here to film movies. It's very photogenic. In fact, if we keep following this road north, we'll go by Big Sur, the Elephant Seal Beach, across the Golden Gate Bridge, all the way through San Francisco, and to a town called Leggett. Now, Leggett's most notable feature, outside of the grocery store and gas station, is a drive-through tree. It's a beautiful little place. Sadly, we're not taking this trip, though, because this car is about to hit a telephone pole going nearly 200 miles an hour.
Strange turns in the crash of $1 million Ferrari in Malibu.
$1 million Ferrari is a pile of junk tonight.
Pre-dawn drag race along Pacific Coast Highway. The alleged street race came to a violent end.
The bulk of the car came to a stop near Decker Road in Malibu. Investigators say the Ferrari could have been going nearly 200 miles an hour.
James Bond story. That's exactly how one investigator is describing the latest bizarre twists in last month's Ferrari crash in Malibu.
Now there's a gun, a yacht, and maybe a connection to Homeland Security.
And that story about the Ferrari racing with a Mercedes on PCH, it appears to be the biggest zero of all.
Now let's go back a little ways. Back to September 20th, 2003. Tiger Telematics has announced they're entering the gaming market. Their handheld video game console, lifestyle product, is called the Game Track, and is in response to the N-Gage. They even announced its existence exactly 1 week before the N-Gage would hit stores. They'll play games, music, videos, and have a built-in camera. Compared to most phones at the time, that's a lot of features. It also advertised being able to track down your kids using GPS, just so you knew where they were. This device sounds pretty great as long as it can keep its promises. But who is making it, though? For that part, we're looking at Tiger Telematics, a company that's just celebrating their first anniversary. A year ago, Carl Freer was a businessman living in Sweden. He had a rocky history, though. At the age of 18, Mr. Freer allegedly forged his father's signature while applying for a loan, and was convicted shortly after. Since then, though, some time has passed, and now he's doing business in America. You see, after leaving Sweden in the late 90s, Mr. Freer allegedly left over a dozen bankruptcies and unpaid tax debt back home, so he needed a fresh start. A new year, new me, if you will. Well, today he's in Jacksonville, Florida, talking to Michael Kurender. Michael Kurender is the owner and CEO of 2 Floridacor locations, and he also has an interesting backstory. In the 1970s, Kurender was a student at Northwestern University and came across some tapes made by a man named Charles Meade. Meade was leader of the End Timers, a cult based in Lake City, Florida, that would take control of parts of the town through business and land ownership. They believed in some things, or that pets could contain demons, newspapers were evil, and members were excommunicated for attending sporting events. Eventually, the FBI got involved and tracked them for years. Although stories have come out about semis carrying automatic weapons and hit orders being placed for people that left the church, nothing stuck. Agents would state that they couldn't find proof federal laws were broken. Despite this, there were some very bad things going on. During the 80s and 90s, 17 people, 14 kids and 3 adults, would die on the compound for medical issues. Years later, multiple women would come out and say when they were minors, "You know what? We all know what's coming next. So we're just going to stop there." Probably for the best. And something about their extremely conservative ideas appealed to Kurender, because in the end he did join them. And that's all led up to now, where he's sitting at a table talking to Carl Freer. Freer is telling him they should merge companies together, having Floridacor purchase Carl's electronics company, Eagle Eye. How is Freer convincing an extremely conservative man with 2 stores, both of which specialize in carpeting, to buy him out and start a high-end electronics company? Well, no idea. But time will show that Carl is a very, very persuasive person. For this new business, they changed the name from Floor Decor to Tiger Telematics, with Mr. Carender immediately liquidating all flooring stock and business assets. We know their future will eventually be the Game Track. What are they doing in the meantime? GPS devices. A device for parents to find their kids' location whenever they needed to. This is what led to the idea for the Game Track. While trying to think of ways to get a kid to hold on to a GPS device, they figured the best way would be, to put in something they want to own. By the end of 2002, Carl would set up Tiger Telematics Europe. While getting ready to manufacture the handheld, they would form partnerships with other companies in the area. Done with stocks and a percentage of sales. Let's just call that foreshadowing for now. While Carl's preparing for the manufacturing, another businessman would join. The local mob in Uppsala, Sweden. Well, they call him the banker. Local police? Fat Steve. We're going to call him Stefan Eriksson. Stefan Eriksson joined the team at Tiger Telematics right before they changed the names to Game Track Limited Europe. If you're wondering why this feels so confusing with the mergers, partnerships, renames, it's allegedly by design. We'll worry about that later though. For now, Eriksson has joined the team and will be quickly moved up to an executive officer role. For 2003, the details are very, very scarce. The company was extremely secretive. In January 2004, the Game Track could be shown for the first time. After this, the biggest news was the company once again restructured some and changed the name. Gizmondo Europe. This was the latest name for the company, and they've decided the device would now be called the Gizmondo. Biggest news here was that in E3 2004, IGN got their hands on the device and had a glowing preview. GPS features that change games as you play, stereo sound, a D-pad that spins for driving games, a PDA, and a camera. There were a few downsides, and they were pretty big. First of all, the battery only lasted for 3 hours. They did say they're working on a new battery though. The other issue was larger. The price. $350. In 2025, that's equal to $575, which is an incredible ask for a handheld from a startup company. They did mention it'd be a cheaper version, one that would play smart ads that would subsidize the cost, but there aren't any details yet. They also announced the launch date for the handheld, October 29th. A few weeks later, they announced a partnership with SCI Games. Fear said, "Gamers demand great game content," and that's precisely what this deal is about for Gizmondo. The deal was for 12 games, and SCI was a skilled company with decades of experience. Not only that, but UK-based Fat Hammer Games, well, they also committed another dozen titles. Good news just kept coming. Days after announcing the SCI deal, Warthog Games announced they were developing Richard Burns' Rally for the Gizmondo. Who is Warthog Games? Well, now they're part of Gizmondo. 2 weeks after announcing the game, they were bought for $8 million. Gizmondo paid in the usual way, a mixture of cash and shares. All these moves are building momentum and buzz. After a great December showing in Ireland, Nvidia and Microsoft announced the Gizmondo would be featured on their stands at CES in Las Vegas. This was in addition to their own Gizmondo branded display that would be showing off the devices. Right now they had it all. They're doing great in previews. They had dozens of games coming, and industry leaders were ready to support them. This was an incredible boost for the system, and things are looking great. It was also the end of 2004. You see, the Gizmondo itself is a tale of 2 years. 2004, you have a lot of press attention. A good number of people are interested in how the handheld does. The N-Gage tried to compete against the DS and the PSP, and it's failing. But strangely enough, it seems like the Gizmondo has the ability to do something slightly different and find their own spot. That they could comfortably be a third option. But the other year is 2005. To start, in January they'd rent a storefront. Instead of anything reasonably priced, they went big. The Gizmondo store is now located at 175 in London's Regent Street, and the inside was a dedication to excess. An article from The Drive breaks it down well. Yearly rent was $300,000. Top to bottom black marble. $750,000 worth of state-of-the-art 3D TVs. $48,000 of phones and cameras. Numerous bars. And a sound system worthy of a mega club. Even the toilets, well, they were lined with Swarovski crystals. Honestly, it felt so on the nose it could double as parody. So much money you're literally urinating on it. But to be fair, you have to have a nice looking place. Especially for all the shoppers coming in after they see the launch party. Because this launch party was going to be a big one. Taking place at the Park Lane Hotel, the launch event for Gizmondo was excessive. comically so. Celebrities and musicians were all brought in to hang out and perform while saying why they were so excited about this product that was paying them. The show is hosted by Danny Minogue and Tom Green, which, hilariously enough, Tom Green said he was going to show everyone how durable the Gizmondo was and proceeded to smash it on the ground. But who was in attendance for this event? Well, Vern Troyer was there, and heavyweight boxing champion Lennox Lewis. Just a few years ago, he knocked out Mike Tyson to retain his title. Now he's here telling you why the Gizmondo was a knockout. Music was performed by Pharrell Williams, Clips, Busta Rhymes, and Sting. MTV Europe actually covered the event and made it into a mini special. This event would be massive for a company like Nintendo or Sony, let alone Tiger Telematics. This was a celebration though. Tomorrow would mark the first day of Gizmondo's dominance. Eurogamer came out hard and said the Gizmondo was, well, it was fine. The screen was nice, the sound was okay, and the camera was passable. The issues came in a few unexpected places. The startup took a long time for a handheld. From turning the device on to when you could navigate at all was around half a minute of waiting. Not a deal breaker. Surprisingly, the biggest problem was the GPS. Being from a company that started out making GPS devices, this was kind of a surprise. You have to be outside and under a clear sky, and still would often disconnect for long stretches of time. Even places in London you couldn't get a reliable signal. CNET was a little rougher. They gave it a 5.9 and noticed everything had a little level of irritation. The camera was good, but you had to navigate menus to get there, so no time for quick snaps. The D-pad felt nice, but there were no analog controls. The device could play movies, sure, but you're going to have to convert them all. Apparently each movie took hours to convert. As far as the device itself, it was covered in a rubberized grip surface, making it feel slightly tacky and attracting dust and debris. Years after release, these would slowly start to deteriorate, so now they just have an uncomfortable stick to them. Even CNN jumped in with complete disregard. Subpar and barely worth a mention, with an insultingly high price tag. The full version was now $400, and the ad-powered version that required you to watch ads every day was $229. Adjusting for inflation is a staggering price tag of $650 for a day one Gizmondo. To put that in comparison, you could buy a Nintendo DS and a Sony PSP at the same price. Not only are they trying to compete against the two big handhelds, but now they have to prove that they're better than both of them combined. That's to say you could find one though. An anonymous source told Eurogamer, there was this thing about the Nvidia deal for the graphics processors. They didn't even order enough silicone to fulfill these pre-orders. Looking back, if someone had done a bit of due diligence, it would have quickly become apparent that the kit wasn't there to do a significant launch of hundreds of thousands of units. This was echoed by some smaller outlets. A gaming site called Hexus, which had a lot of Gizmondo coverage, said they requested one for 6 months and were told supply was low. They even offered to pay full price and were still denied. The next issue were the games. At launch, there were only 2. Fat Hammer Classics, essentially a collection of 3 mobile games called Super Drop Mania, Stunt Car Extreme, and Angelfish. Absolute classics we all know, so no need to go over them right now. The other game, which was the only original title, was a remake of a Commodore 64 game, Trailblazer. You were a ball rolling down a track, and you press left or right to change lanes. Then people started looking at the upcoming titles. Games Factory Publishing said it was bringing Typing Tutor to the handheld, a handheld which had neither a keyboard nor a touchscreen. Less than a month from the UK launch, Gizmondo would come back out and reiterate 89 games were coming. They set a staggering amount of titles from companies like Disney, Ubisoft, and Microsoft. Also, the server for the AdSmart version should be on any day now, so those users will start getting their Sprite commercials to subsidize this thing. On a side note, one Sprite commercial did leak, and it was a guy tattooing Chinese characters on people from a takeout menu.
Marketing. Hey, Josh. New tattoo? Yeah, it means dragon.
Mine means eternal life.
A very 2000s commercial. You see, this is the one thing I love about the Gizmondo story. It's very consistent. It was a constant two-prong attack. First, they would reassure the public, and then do something confusing out of nowhere. In May, they would announce the US release date, August 11th. 2 weeks after that, 2 weeks later, they would buy 75% of the ISIS model agency. Freer stated, "This product will complement and is a natural development for our highly successful and state-of-the-art telematics device." You see, now I'm not sure if he's calling the models a product that complements the Gizmondo here, but the plan was that they would save time and money by having direct access to the models. We all know how that is. How many hundreds of hours a year we waste by negotiating prices for models. Now they could avoid all of that. Business 101, folks. Not to jump ahead too far, but in the end, this would be the only part of their business that would make a profit. You see, foreshadowing? It's a narrative device in which the storyteller gives an advanced hint of what's to come later in the story. Immediately after this, Ericsson will enter a Gizmondo-branded Ferrari into the 2005 24 Hours of Le Mans. For those that don't know, it's a 24-hour race held in France that had an entire Gizmondo team and car all ready to go. Where is this money coming from for all these purchases? Don't worry about that. Let's just take a look at these results. All right, out of 49 racers, they qualified 49th, and didn't finish the race. Looks like a wheel issue knocked them out in hour 18. Oh man. Look, maybe this race wasn't for them. Maybe they should try something different. I mean, they love cars, but sometimes you just gotta try racing other things, probably. The company bought a racehorse. Yep. Immediately after announcing the opening of their LA office, to complement the London one, they announced the purchase of a chestnut colt. Obviously, they named it Gizmondo. Not sure what the plan was here, but I'm not a business owner. Sadly, he lost his first race. Keep it up, buddy. I'm sure you'll do better later. Now, I don't want to change topics. Trust me, I want to talk about this horse all day. And I promise we'll get back to him. You have my word. But for now, we have an American launch to get ready for, which was pushed back now to October 22nd. Well, we're looking at the launch. Freer, though? Freer was a visionary. He was already planning the next device. You see, while researching this, I found an April Fool's joke posted by Retro Gamer. It was a widescreen Gizmondo. The comments section had some people talking about how funny this joke was, and how ridiculous of an idea it would be. One problem though, this thing wasn't a joke. It was real. The same anonymous source from earlier said Freer would pull out the device, a widescreen prototype, at meetings to show off, letting people see firsthand the device they weren't even selling yet was about to become obsolete. He stated, "You're thinking, please put that away. You're not really helping the agenda for this morning. Can we get them to focus on this launch, the one you've already mentally done, as opposed to Gizmondo 2? Their worry was valid. You see, it's called the Osborne effect. It's named after Osborne Computers. You see, in the early 80s, the CEO of Osborne Computer announced a few new products were coming out. Naturally, people stopped buying the original while waiting for the newest computer. Why would they buy something that would be obsolete soon? The problem was that the CEO got ahead of himself. The computers weren't coming out soon. They're still a few years out. The public didn't care though. They were fine with waiting. In the end, Osborne would go bankrupt from a lack of sales. And that's what the Gizmondo is trying to avoid here. You really don't want a new model leaking before the first one even comes out. The issue was that the widescreen news did come out though. Detailed specs and images released. But how did this information get to be public? Well, the CEO himself mentioned an upgrade was coming early next year. A month before launching the product in America, the CEO told them, in 6 months, a new superior version was coming out. Somehow that wouldn't even be the biggest issue though. In fact, nearly everyone would forget about this even happened. And that's because things get more complicated with their financial report. Yahoo came right out and said it. Tiger Telematics for $325 million in the hole. Right off the bat, this is a staggering financial loss. They lost $11 million in 2002, $8 million in 2003, which feels like a lot. But then you see that they lost $99 million in 2004, and then $210 million in the first half of 2005. I'm not a financial expert, but this feels very, very bad. And there were some legal issues. The Jordan F1 team was suing for breach of contract. They said Gizmondo allegedly backed out of a sponsorship program. Their landlords in the UK were suing for allegedly unpaid rent. The PR firm they paid for 2003 and 2004, well, they said they were allegedly owed millions of dollars. Even MTV Europe, they came out and said that they allegedly weren't paid $1.5 million and were entering legal proceedings. It didn't stop there, though. A few people point out that the money was being shifted around in strange ways. Gizmondo paid Northern Lights for 2 games that had never come out, Chicane and Colors. The problem was that those games were being developed by Warthog and Indie Studios, and they were 50% owned by Freer and Ericsson. This also included a $4 million payment to Game Factory Publishing, a company owned by a close friend of Freer. Freer admitted the mistake and paid the money back, advising that it was just an error, but it was too late now. Everyone was looking closer. Kurender, who was the CEO back in 2004, bought into the company, sold all of his locations, sold all of his assets. He was missing almost $650,000 in back pay from 2004 alone. This is over half of his yearly salary. The paper shown that Freer and Ericsson allegedly received $1.5 million in bonuses, $1.8 million in stock options, and just under $400,000 in car allowances. This isn't even covering the hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments their spouses and partners allegedly received for consultation work. One of the other anonymous sources in the Eurogamer article put it best: it was all smoke and mirrors, really. They didn't actually own anything. Everything was done with a strange partnership deal and the offer of shares. Allegedly, the company would offer stocks instead of cash and make it so you couldn't sell them for 2 years. The value of the stocks was tied to the value of the company. If the company went bankrupt, they'd be worthless. There could be a reason for all of this. We just have to wait for them to respond. The problem was they'd have a lot more to respond to in a few weeks. October 24th, a Swedish newspaper called Aftonbladet released an article allegedly tying Freer, Ericsson, and the 2 executives in key positions to the Uppsala Mafia in Sweden. They tied the group to bank fraud, extortion, multiple assaults, robbery, and some other crimes. You see, Ericsson had a past. A little over 10 years ago, before joining Tiger Telematics, he was released from prison for cocaine and drug charges. He was allegedly running them out of an auto body shop. After that, he would open Cannon and Casso, Cannon Debt Collectors, and operate his activities out of there. Court documents would describe him as a debt collector of the underworld. Eventually, he would be convicted of fraud and counterfeiting, trying to defraud the Swedish Central Bank of 22 million kroner, roughly $2 million. There were a lot of other things, though. Court documents would allegedly show him breaking into people's homes and beating them, allegedly threatening to cut off fingers and shoving guns in mouths. The kinds of things you see in a movie. In 1994, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and the case was hard to find people to testify against him. In fact, a lead witness said he survived 2 bombing attacks leading up to the trial. First, his car was bombed, and a few days later, so was his office. Pretty strange coincidence. After their testimony, though, all of the members would be convicted across several different trials. The article's impact was massive. Less than 3 days later, on October 27th, Carl Freer and Stefan Ericsson would both resign from Gizmondo. The financial reports and criminal charges coming to light were too much to handle. Freer personally was not connected to any crimes, but stated he stepped down for the sake of the company. The financial report and article all occurred the same week that Gizmondo launched in the United States. They spent $30 million in advertising leading up to the day. I won't draw this out. By a wide margin, it would become the worst-selling console in history. The Nintendo DS would sell 154 million units. The N-Gage would sell 3 million units. The Gizmondo, 25,000. The revenue showing in the UK financial reports came out to roughly 5,000 units sold over 6 months. From this point forward, no more games would be released in North America. The EU would get a few more, like Gizmondo Navigator Co-Pilot 2006, which, when you figure that GPS features were poor at best, doesn't seem like a good title. There would be no way to recover from this. In 1 year, their stocks went from a hair under $32 a share to 34 cents. This is what a 99% drop in value looks like. Speaking of value, what was the company worth now? Originally they were valued at $1 billion, but that was a year ago. Right now, $22 million, and that's mostly in assets. In my non-expert opinion, is very bad. January 23rd, Gizmondo Europe would file for administration. In America, we call it bankruptcy. This was less than 3 months after the US launch. They're saying Gizmondo allegedly were selling shares of stock as cash, which now had lost all value. Immediately, their US and UK stores would close down. The game developers were next. Warthog, a company they purchased with stocks and cash, was no more. Their game Mama Can I Mow the Lawn never got released. Members of the team, though, would make a new studio. That studio would eventually become Telltale Fusion. On February 6th, the Gizmondo was officially discontinued. Less than 11 months since it was launched. As the proceedings went on, liquidators would go over the assets. They were unable to account for half the money. Nearly $200 million just vanished, and was allegedly unaccounted for. People would forget that too, though, because that wouldn't even be the most eventful Gizmondo news that month. Remember this part of the road? Well, here we are. It's February 21st, 2006. Early morning. Stefan Eriksson is intoxicated, and he's driving his red $1.2 million Ferrari Enzo down the Pacific Coast Highway. He's heading west of Malibu, going in excess of 160 miles an hour. There was a bump in the road, a lip and eye of an inch high. If it was one of us driving, you'd hardly notice it. If you're going 160 miles per hour in a car with very little ground clearance, you'd notice immediately. Eriksson would lose control of his car. The Ferrari went slightly airborne. Most likely a rear shock absorber broke and would fly off the road. The vehicle would then get bisected by a telephone pole. Officer David Hielsen was one of the first people on the scene, and he couldn't believe what he saw. The car was bisected. The back half of the car was nearly 300 feet away from the front. In fact, I may actually be underselling this wreckage. Upon arriving at the scene, Hielsen didn't even know what it was. Multiple pieces of what appeared to be a vehicle were spread across the length of 4 football fields. The car hit so hard, the telephone pole splintered. It was completely destroyed. What he saw next, though, completely defied logic. In the middle of the wreckage, right next to the eviscerated car, the driver was alive. In fact, Eriksson was standing next to the destroyed vehicle. The only physical injury he sustained was a cut lip. In fact, Steve was not only just fine, he was telling the officers what happened. That the car's driver, Dietrich, ran off into the hills, stranding him there. A breathalyzer would show that he was over the legal limit. Eriksson then reached into his pocket and pulled out an anti-terrorism task force badge. The officer was trying to process what was happening. It was then that Hielsen noticed a third man, someone named Trevor, was just standing there. He said he stopped by to see if anyone was hurt. Law enforcement asked him why he didn't have a car. He said, well, he was a passenger in a Mercedes-Benz that was racing a Ferrari. He got out to check on the driver, and his friend just left him there. Some time was passing, and the police were still searching the hills for Dietrich, going as far as to secure helicopters to fly over the area. It was a chaotic scene, but officers didn't think the man was real. 2 people, both passengers in 2 different cars, and a mystery driver in the hills? It didn't make any sense. During the search, a passerby allegedly let Trevor use his cell phone. Trevor would sit in the person's car and made several phone calls. Afterwards, he got out, and the kind Samaritan would drive home. This kind Samaritan, though, would contact the officers a few days later. When they got home, they state they found a full handgun clip stuffed under their seat. While detectives were still checking out the scene, a blacked-out Hummer H2 rolled up. 2 men jumped out of the vehicle and flashed badges. Both men said they were with the Department of Homeland Security and needed to speak with Erickson immediately. Something didn't feel right. Heilson radioed his sergeant, who said to keep the suspects there. That didn't last, though. The men would take Stefan back into the black H2, interrogate him, and then drive off. The police, not wanting to get in the way of federal government, eventually released him. The 2 men had access to the crime scene. It's unknown what evidence they could have grabbed. One report allegedly states a handgun was taken by them. This handgun was never recovered. The problem was, and you may want to be seated for this, that these 2 weren't actually with Homeland Security. And Erickson, he wasn't in any kind of anti-terrorism task force. It was all a lie. In fact, one of the agents was a member of the Uppsala Mafia. He was real close to Freer and Erickson. And he would, allegedly, help do work on Freer's $14 million yacht. How did he get access to Homeland Security badge, though? The badges allegedly came from Freer and Erickson's connections to the SGVTA, the San Gabriel Valley Transit Authority. This was an incredibly small bus line started by a man named Mr. Maiwandi, who got a start trading in some old motorcycles for his first bus. Most accepted theory was that the men traded cameras to the bus line in exchange for police clearance. According to him, one day a Rolls Royce pulled up, and out stepped a man that introduced himself as Stefan Erickson. And he made an offer the small bus owner couldn't refuse. He offered to install face scanners and cameras inside each bus for free. All he wanted was for the bus to take advantage of a post-9/11 law and make them deputy commissioners in the bus line's police department. Erickson explained that he was on the front lines defending Southern California. You see, after 9/11, to make the country safer, America gave some permissions to transportation companies. Using some loose interpretation that some would call a misunderstanding, they believed that the 9/11 Commission Act would allow the SGVTA to have its own police force. This was incorrect. They still allegedly made the badges, though, and handed them out. The federal government would point out later that they had no legal right to do so, as they weren't federal agents, and were very confused on how they obtained the .gov credentials. It's unsure if Mr. Maiwandi ever had anything installed on those buses. He would eventually be arrested, though, and as far as I can see, his case was eventually dismissed. The SGVTA would have to cease operations in July 2006. He stated they would be back in a couple weeks. This was 19 years ago. Eventually, he would give a quote during a phone interview. This whole thing could have been avoided if Erickson had just been satisfied driving the Trans Am. Either way, the badges were flashed, and they all got away from the scene. The police knew they made a mistake. This was the man driving under the influence that got into a horrific accident. He was handing over the people that were never checked out. Within the next few weeks, though, more details would come out. The police realized a few things. Erickson was the one that was driving. Dietrich never existed. Also, the other man at the crash, Trevor, who bizarrely previously worked at West Coast Customs, the auto shop from Pimp My Ride, was actually a passenger in the Ferrari. The police went to question him and found out not only was the address he gave incorrect, but he'd also fled the country. They moved too slow. Days later, phone calls came in from Scotland's Capital Bank. The Enzo that was destroyed actually belonged to them. The bank had no idea their cars were illegally taken out of the country, $3.8 million worth of cars. While police were making a case, Erickson's wife would have some similar issues. After getting pulled over in Beverly Hills, officers found her license was suspended and her car was also unregistered. Scotland Yard would also inform the police that this was another stolen car. Law enforcement heard everything they needed to. On April 6, 2006, the raid would commence on Erickson's Bel Air house. He was placed under arrest for alleged embezzlement, cocaine possession, grand theft auto, weapons charges, and a few other things. Freer's home and yacht were raided. Police would find bags of evidence, along with over a dozen rifles, shotguns, and handguns across both locations. He would eventually be arrested, though, for allegedly using his badge to buy guns. Freer wasn't allowed to buy guns, but stated this was a misunderstanding. During Erickson's trial, he would face up to 14 years. Do you remember earlier, when it was notoriously hard to convict him at trials? In November of 2006, the court case ended in a mistrial. The jury was deadlocked. 10 people saying he was guilty, 2 people saying he was innocent. He would use this opportunity to plead out. He accepted some of the charges and spent 3 years in jail. January 21st, 2008, he was released from jail and deported back to Sweden. Upon arriving back home, the next year, he'd be arrested for extortion and sentenced to 18 months in a maximum security prison. For Freer, he was never convicted. He was only arrested and released. He cut all business ties with Eriksson, and after his arrest, his yacht would vanish from the marina. He would then put up his house for sale and stay out of the public eye. He would resurface for a bit in 2007, saying he had plans to bring back the Gizmondo, but this never happened. And thus ended the story of the Gizmondo. Well, not quite. Remember when I said we would get back to the horse? This is the Great Yarmouth Racecourse. It's July 24th, 2006. After the company went bankrupt, and while Eriksson was on trial, Gizmondo the horse would win his first race. It took him years of trying, but he finally did it. His career would be over shortly after this, though. In fact, a few years later, he'd retire and would be sent to northern England to spend the rest of his life on a farm as a trail horse. I appreciate every single person that's made it this far, though. Like, it really means a whole lot. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.